So, Valerie, it is such a pleasure to talk to you today and use your recently published book on fallback moments in our conversation together today. So, welcome to this little interview today.
Thank you, Nadia. It's so beautiful to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation.
So, Valerie, maybe just say a couple words about your book, and then we get right into what is fallback.
Sure. The name of the book is Leaving the Ghost Light Burning, Illuminating Fallback and Embrace of the Fullness of You. And the book is based on my research over a decade that started as theoretical research into this phenomenon of fallback in the field of adult development, and turned into research on the lived experience of fallback. And the book is written for you and me and your neighbor and your partner and the person that we meet on the street. For it's not heavy in theoretical language, but it's really heavy in an invitation to explore the fullness of who you are and the journey that you're on, told through the stories of three individuals and their own experiences of fallback. So it's an invitation to enter into that space in their company.
Wonderful. Valerie, actually, before we get into what is a fallback, I'm really intrigued with the title of your book. What's the story behind Leaving the Ghost Light On?
Oh, wow. So the ghost light is actually from theater, comes from theater. And the ghost light is a single light bulb that's left burning on the stage of theaters around the world when the theater is dark. And the purpose of the ghost light is twofold. One is superstition, because superstition lore says that the ghost of a theater, when it is dark, assume that it's been abandoned and rush the stage and cause all sorts of mischief. And the practical reason for the ghost light is so that if people were to actually wander on stage when the theater was dark, they could easily take a stumble off the stage into the orchestra pit and do harm. And I encountered this idea, this phenomenon of the ghost light when I was in the process of writing my book, and it just resonated so fully with me and my experience and thoughts about fallback and what happens when we try to shut out the parts of self, the mischievous spirits that try to rush our stage. And when the damage that we do to ourselves and to others when we don't leave the light on for them and welcome them in.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, there's so much more to explore, but let's start maybe at the beginning. So to tell me and our audience, what is a fallback moment?
Yeah. So fallback is when we unconsciously slip, fall, tumble, are thrown into an earlier part of our sense making and our acting and our feeling, where we have no other options. We did a moment before. we had options, we had complexity, we had perspectives, but we are triggered into a smaller space in the way that we can see ourselves in the world around us. And for that moment, be it actual moment or a day or weeks or, even longer sometimes, we don't have access to those parts of self that would comprise what is known in the field of adult development as our center of gravity, which is often thought of as the ideal place that we, when the birds are chirping and the sun is shining and the breeze is blowing, how we can show up to the world. But the reality, I think, is of our center of gravity is kind of the automatic place we go to, not the best, but, kind of the automatic place that we go to in our sense making. Fallback is when we don't even have access to that for a period of time.
Hmm. Yeah, well, we've all certainly are aware of these moments and the shattering effects they can have in our life and our relationship. In your book, And you already used the metaphor of theater quite a bit when you explained to me about the ghost light and what that means. Why is theater an analogy that feels helpful for you when you explore this inner world of oneself, the big and the small and the ones that we pushed away?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually started thinking about ways to explore fallback and using theater as an entry point into that before I discovered Ghostlight. So it just kind of synchronously matched up. But I have to credit my friend and colleague, Fred Jones. I was at a session that he was presenting in about the multiplicity of characters that comprise ourselves. And at the time, I was thinking, how do we create a way in for people to access parts of self that we don't want to acknowledge, that we don't want to inhabit, to know within ourselves or make known in the world? And I thought this is a really helpful, playful way of entering into an acknowledgement that we are not this one character that shows up in a role in every scene of our lives consistently. We are this ensemble, this full cast of characters. And this allows, the theater analogy allows us to be playful about that, gives us some language that we wouldn't otherwise have as we're trying to dig into these darker corners of self. Gives us actually language and a process that allows us to kind of go through the steps of coming into relationship with these characters, finding their origin stories, determining what scenes they show up to, how they actually do in these scenes, how they might rehearse for a future scene, and how they might review how they are showing up in the scenes of their lives. So it just gives us a lot of fun, playful, not so scary language to come to know the parts of self that we often don't automatically see or acknowledge.
I personally love this metaphor of the theater or ensemble. You know, when you referenced reading my chapter on the selves, I talk about the inner orchestra, right? So it's the same idea of just acknowledging that there is a multifacetedness to who we are, and that it's not as simple as saying, you know, this is Nadia and I have one set of beliefs and one set of wants and wishes and ways to behave, or this is Valerie and this is just who I am, because there is so much more. There's this richness to who you are. So I'm curious, from a very personal perspective, what drew you to study and write about these phenomena, this observation?
Yeah. Well, I encountered this theory of adult development that we can continue to grow and change even once we've stopped growing physically throughout our lifetime. And I discovered that in my doctoral program very early on, and I was really fascinated by this. And I loved that it gave me a lens through which to see the journey of my life to a certain point, and also to see the possibilities that lay ahead, that could lie ahead. And so I was smitten, and I thought, I do not always show up with my full capacities all the time, which is what the theory, especially as a broad brush, kind of paints this stairway to heaven, onward and upward trajectory. And I just knew that that was not the case for me in my daily life, that I fall back many times in the course of a day. And I wanted to understand, one, am I an anomaly? Am I the only one? And of course, I knew I wasn't. We all, as you noted at the beginning, we all experience fallback all the time. But where is this in the theory, and why isn't it present? And truth, I wanted to tidy up these frayed edges of a theory that I thought was so beautiful, that I still think is so beautiful. But in the course of my exploration, I really unraveled the edges even further and have more questions than answers. But I really wanted to understand, for me, what was this about? And also to make the theory more real, more human and humane, to really reflect the full messiness of what it is to go through this journey of being a human, a full human.
And how would you say, can knowing about our fallback moments, even having language for it, right? How does this support me in my own personal growth, assuming that that's something that I'm interested in? And how can it affect or enrich my relationship with others?
Yeah. I think that when we think of ourselves as this one set, enduring character, that we dismiss all of the beauty of the messiness and imperfection that lives within us in all of these parts of self. We have an incomplete picture of ourselves and an incomplete picture of others. And I think in the beginning, when I started exploring this, it really was, how can we, because I knew I had grown from my fallback quite often. It is paradoxically, falling back, but there inevitably is a springing forward, at least to where we were before, if not a little bit further ahead. And for me, that felt like the goal at the time. Okay, how can we grow from this? And as I've studied it within myself and with others and accompanied others, I've come to realize that growth, that transformation may happen, but that's actually not even the point. The point is to witness our own unfolding, to acknowledge the beauty in what we don't tend to think is beautiful, what we haven't been told is beautiful, what we tell others is not pretty, that needs to be hidden away. To acknowledge that, to really come into relationship with that, to befriend these parts of self and say, what do you have to teach me? Because they are there in protection of something that we value greatly. And we don't see them that way. They don't show up that way. But when we can begin to form a relationship to them and ask those questions and determine what is it that you are here in protection of, then we can be more thoughtful about who we cast them in the scenes of our lives with, what other parts of self and what other characters that make up our ensemble that will help them meet their intentions. We begin to become more clear about what is our intention with ourselves in relationship in this context. And we hopefully do less harm to ourselves and to others because we're able to give voice in a different way, not a burning down the set kind of way, which is the way my fallback characters usually show up on the scene, screaming and just with full on wreckage, but in a way that acknowledges what they're there in protection of and can do so in a way that it can be heard, that it can be received. And the part for others that I think is really important, I think that coming into relationship with our fallback is a tremendous gift for ourselves because there is so much beauty in the integration of all of ourselves. But when we see that we are not enduring and constant, and this self that we want to proclaim from the rooftops and for everyone to believe that we are, we begin to see that others aren't either, and we can offer them more compassion as they show up in different ways with different characters in the different scenes of their lives. And we can connect on a more authentic and real and loving and accepting basis with them.
Yeah, no, that resonates deeply. Right now I'm going through a program where these smaller, more restricted parts of ourselves are all labeled saboteurs, and the language that is being used is actually one of, having to overcome them or even exterminate them in a way. And I'm wondering what you believe happens when we reject those smaller, more constricted parts of ourselves.
I just want to say I love actually that word, saboteurs. I think that is so evocative, and that's what they feel like. And I want to also acknowledge that when I set out to do my research in this area, I really wanted to figure out, how do we lock them backstage? Don't let them on the scene at all. I mean, that was really my orientation. So over the course of more than a decade, it was a transformation in my thinking and knowing that and just observing in self and others, it doesn't work that way. And even as we come into relationship with our fallback, I want you and your listeners to know, I know you do because you talk about this in your own book, you don't get rid of these characters. You don't get rid of your fallback. This isn't a 5-step guide to being rid of those more constricted parts of the self and showing up on the scene perfectly every time. It's not going to happen. But I will say that if we try to banish them from the theater of self, they're not going anywhere. Just as in Ghostlight lore, they're waiting until the theater is dark, and they are going to storm the stage and cause all sorts of damage. Whether we acknowledge, if we don't acknowledge them, they will continue to show up in that way. If we acknowledge them and say, "What are you here to teach me? I see you have wisdom in you," then they don't feel the need anymore. They are seen and they are heard for the first time, and they can come in a much more peaceful and generous manner.
Yeah, that's also very much my experience in facilitating, coaching these inner parts when I deal with myself and with my clients. And you know, one of the I told you earlier that one of my mentors, Peter Koenig, developed a particular way of exploring psyche through the entry point of money. And one of the things that I learned from him that was really helpful for me was, he always says, you know, these smaller restricted parts, you know, they will not be exterminated. We cannot get rid of them. They're sort of the set of who we are as human beings that we've been born with. However, the question is, are we conscious of them or are we not? Right. So, for example, you know, let's say being manipulative is something that I've really rejected in myself. He's like, your choice is not whether to be manipulative or not. Your choice is whether you can do it in full conscience or not.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. And what you're saying too makes me think about my daughter was telling me last night, she's 9, and she was saying, we were learning about emotions today. And she was saying that fear is actually in protection of us. You know, fear is a really important emotion that we need to let on the scene, like that we need to let come into us, because it is protecting us from something. It is giving us a natural response to something that could be dangerous. And the next step in this, beyond the 9-year-old knowing of this, is, okay, you know, where is that in me? Where did that originate? And to your point, owning it, saying this lives in me too. And it is not that I am not beauty and light and love. I am that. And I am also, you know, anger and punitive and, you know, and manipulation, and those parts live in me too. And if we can own those within ourselves, and we can start to explore them, and if we own them with others, we begin to open up the capacity for them to do that same exploration. So I really appreciate the power in doing the thing that we've been taught our whole lives not to do. Acknowledge, act out on those things, those darker parts of self, and acknowledge that they live it within us. It's not this or that. It is this and that.
Yeah. So, you know, the reason why I love your approach and take on this so much is that it feels like a deeply humanistic approach, right? Like an approach that honors who we are as human beings and in all of our glorious fallibility. And on the one hand, you know, that creates so much space for self-compassion, which I think is a wonderful and really deeply needed entry point into compassion with others, for example. However, if I play devil's advocate for a moment, then I'm sometimes questioning of, you know, all of this self-acceptance I think is deeply needed and wonderful. but where does that leave the need for self-improvement, right? So how do we navigate this tension between I'm okay just the way I am and I could be better?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I actually, the humanistic aspect of adult development theory is one of my critiques of it, because, again, we get back into the sweetness and light of everything. And I think the acceptance part is real and important. And I also think it's not, and here I am, so just deal with it. It is a calling to connect to intention around what do I want to offer the world? How do I want to show up to it? What is my intention around this relationship that I have with this other individual, or in my offerings to the world more broadly? And so I think for me, the intention is that calling beyond this is just who I am and I am accepting it all. It's to the, how do I accept this part of me, acknowledge what it brings me, but also have the other pieces of me that need to be there and identify for what purpose to meet those intentions for being better for myself, for being better for my family, for being better for the people who I serve, who I speak with, who I accompany, for being better in our world. And I don't know that always looks like growth necessarily. I think that comes, I think that unfolds, but I think when we are just trying to get to the top of the mountain, like I am this bigness, that we stand very unsteady at that peak without having filled out the base. And so this exploration allows us to go and fill the base of the mountain out more, to look around and see what are the resources and tools here that I missed on my first journey up to the top, and how might they serve me and others as we move towards our intentions. So intention is really an important aspect of the coming into relationship as well, for me.
Yeah. And Valerie, so on the one hand, one could say to explore this within the context of our personal relationships is already vulnerable enough, but it can be done because there are people who love us, who are with us, usually, whether or not we always show up as our best selves. But how does fallback manifest in organizations? So in teams, what are the repercussions of fallback moments for individuals in those systems, but also for the whole system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one of the triggers for fallback is contextual gravitational pulls. So if we have a center of gravity of capacities, developmental capacities, when we walk into any context, it has its own gravitational center of gravity, like a center of gravity that of it, what it holds developmentally. So when we walk into a context that has an earlier, less complex center of gravity, we can be pulled back to a smaller expression of self, to having fewer capacities. And so often on teams, when we walk into organizations that have a center of gravity that is less complex, we are pulled back often and held in that space. And that does not allow us to bring the fullness of ourselves. It doesn't allow us to invite anyone else into that space. And it doesn't allow us to open up possibilities for creativity, for new options, for complexity, for seeing in different ways that we weren't able to before. And often what that means is, as an individual, you might leave the organization because it's not giving you what you need, or you might find those things elsewhere and just say, this is all I'm going to give. So there are parts of what we can offer the world and in our context that are held back when we are not able to bring our fullness, and when we don't invite others to that space either. You were talking before about how we constrict what we are able to offer to others when we don't own it. The Peter statement about, I am manipulative, but that lives within us, whether we say it or not. What happens if we do open that up? What happens if we do begin to own that? And I believe it has to happen with the leaders in organizations first, because they need to make it a safe space for others to bring their fullness, to acknowledge, I missed the mark. I missed the mark. And how might owning that and coming from a place of, I missed the mark because this felt at risk to me in this situation, I am worried about this, allow us to have more authentic connection, for there to be more truth in the space of our humanity, in our teams, in our workplaces. How might us owning the characters that we bring, the roles that we take up in our teams and our organizations, allow other people to see what lies beneath that, what informs that, and allow us to have less of a grip on it, so other people might take up those roles, so we might also play around with other roles. So I remember talking about this with Jennifer Garvey-Berger, who was one of the key thinkers in my original research. And she said, I think that in organizations, we need to have create the conditions. So have conversations about what are the conditions that allow us to bring our biggest selves, that allow us to grow the center of gravity of our teams, of our organizations, and also to make it a safe space not to. So when we fall back, not saying, well, that's just Bob and he's always like that, but being able to have compassion because we see that in ourselves too, and we can own that, and we can actually work our way through that with Bob and own our parts that we have projected onto Bob, take that back from him and imagine how we might bring different characters again towards our intentions as a team, as an organization.
Yeah, no, I think that was a wonderful explanation. I also love the gravitational field. It sounded very Star Trek-y. So no, that was a great explanation. One of the clearest ones that I've heard about what the maturity of a team can do for us, but also against us in a way, and how we can grow that together, and the role of role modeling of leaders within that field to grow the consciousness, the gravitational pull upwards in a way, but also to allow for the downwards to happen and to be integrated. Now, I'm interested from a more structural perspective. What do you think HR, maybe the CEO of the organization, sort of what can be done from a structural perspective to allow for that space to be opened?
Yeah, I think that the context, looking into the cultural context of an organization and a team is really important, and holding the space, creating an environment where those conversations that Jennifer referenced can be opened up, so that we can say, I've done this with teams, and it's really powerful because we know that we bring a certain self to a particular system, whether that's a family system or a organizational system or a company, and to be able to go through the exploration of what role do I take up in this team, and to really start to think about, why is that? Where does that come from within me? What character do I bring to this role, and where has that been throughout the scenes of my life, and where is it helpful to me, and where is it not? Like, where is it not welcome at all, and what is it here in protection of? And if we can start to name and identify those things, and the safe space is really important, and this is where your HR folks or your leaders of organizations have to be invested and willing to go first, to say, this lives in me too, and I see that when I come to this space, I bring this character, and I think it's helpful in these ways, and I think it is not helpful in these ways or in these scenes, but this is what it's about for me. And the name of this character is Tirading Tessa. And so other people, then are sharing theirs. And it's no surprise that I might have a tirading Tessa in me for my team members. It's just, okay, wait, now we've named it so we can actually begin to talk about it. And I can say, I see tirading Tessa is creeping on the stage right now, and I wonder if that's the character that's going to best meet our intention, or who else might need to be there to accompany her. Or can I take some of the tirading Tessa from you in this particular context so that you don't have to? It just opens it up to be more playful and light, and for us to be able to try on different roles, to be able to not be typecast, to not have a script written for us that we have to follow, to imagine what might best suit this situation. Because I often think that we just live into the scripts that were written for us, and we don't think, does this really apply anymore? And is this really what is going to allow me to get where I'm going? And I say all of this as if it's easy, and it's not. And, I'm really fascinated, interested in the individuals and the context that can be created that allow us to be able to have these explorations that don't feel like, and I'm going to say this and then I'm going to be fired. I'm going to lose my job. I will lose my livelihood. I will lose my reputation. My ego will crumble, the whole thing. So I'm really interested in, and I pay attention to what allows that to happen. And I think, and I live into that exploration myself, because I often feel like I could be fired, like I reveal a lot about myself in these kinds of talks in my book, and, in my interactions with people, because what feels like real and true to me. And that's really important to me. And if I'm going to ask other people to do it, and this is where I think the leader part comes in, I'm going to have to be willing to do it myself. And I remember Octavia, who's one of the characters in my book, talking about she is in charge. Her title, she's supposed to lead the transformation of an organization in order to lead transformation into society. And she said, I've come to realize that I can't transform this organization if I'm not willing to transform myself. I have to be in this, and I have to be willing to reveal these things about me, all of it, the light and the dark, in order for other people to decide that they're going to as well, in order for us, for the culture, for the center of gravity to change here, so that we might impact things differently out there.
Yeah. Thank you, Valerie. This is beautiful. I think there is so much richness in what you have shared for our personal lives, but also for our professional, organizational realities. So before we close, one last question. You have the book, obviously, so people who want to deepen this through self-study can, but what other offers do you have around Fallback and people who want to continue this exploration?
Thank you for that. Yes, I have a 6-week deep dive online live course by the same name as the book, Leaving the Ghost Light Burning, Illuminating Fallback and Embrace of the Fullness of You. And it's an opportunity for folks to come into the Ghost Light Theater and step into the light, and to begin to explore these parts of self in the company of others through a curated experience that is very intimate and accepting, and holding these kind of environments that we described, that I described about in organizations and teams, where you can imagine what brings the fullness of you, but you can also explore when you don't show up in your fullness and what that's about, and come into relationship and friendship, learn these lessons from the full ensemble of your characters, begin to practice into the space of imagining what are my intentions for a future scene, and what characters do I need to bring, and what measure, who's going to be my co-star, what costumes do I don, what props need to be there to support me in showing up in this way, and to engage in action inquiry around that. So you act and then you inquire, what worked for me, what worked for the audience outside of myself, the other actors outside of myself, and to just come into relationship to see things that we haven't been able to see. The beauty of this particular offering is that so much of this is a practice, a practice of noticing, a practice of reflecting, a practice of trying things out, of acting and inquiring. And so this gives a sustained cadence for that practice. So it begins to become part of our daily lives. And also that you do it in the company of others who are on this journey too, of developing, discovering their ensemble of characters. And in the process, you see and accept and love in them the parts of self that they don't think are lovable. And you can see yourself in them. And when you can do that, you can begin to love that part in you as well. So the company of others is really, I think, an important aspect. I have a webinar upcoming with our mutual friend, Alice Agnestakis, and she is, we're doing a fallback and coaching session, which allows people to explore something that you noted, I think, at the beginning of our interview, which is how we bring our whole ensemble of characters to every interaction that we're in. We may not want to acknowledge them, but when we encounter our clients and we feel ourselves triggered in those moments, how are we able to support them through that when we don't actually do that exploration within ourselves? So it allows us through this webinar, we'll do a very experiential guidance into, like, what is that about in you, and working that part of self so that we might uncover the lessons in ourselves that may also allow us to guide others in their self-discovery. So there are those webinar offerings, and then just one-on-one accompaniment as people are coming into relationship. It helps to have a companion on the journey into these dark spaces, someone to be there with you as you step into the light.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Valerie. This is amazing. I think you have some great offers, and I wish you all the luck with unfolding this field and bringing this work to the world, which I think is very, very needed. So.
And you too, Nadia. I'm so grateful for you, and so excited for all of your beautiful offerings to the world too.
Wonderful. Thank you.